Ever since I was a kid, I've been a huge fan of werewolves. Except for that one from The Prisoner of Azkaban, which definitely gave me nightmares when I was younger. But in fact, the first book I tried writing back in high school, even before Multiverse Tales, revolved heavily around werewolves. It was like a mix of Underworld meets Twilight. But despite my love for these creatures, I've only done one full werewolf episode on this channel, and it was years ago, with Pokemon as werewolves. And I think part of the reason for that is I've never loved my rendering style for fur. Until recently. In my recent Kids TV Characters as SCPs episode, I finally figured out a rendering style for fur that I think looks really, really cool. So I wanted to try applying that to some new werewolf designs. Partially inspired by a comment from a subscriber who goes by Wahid Abdullah, today I'm gonna take some famous pop culture dogs and turn them into werewolves. Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
It was recently requested of me by Miss Annelies Van Helsing that I scribe a list of the werewolves and werewolf-like creatures her family has come across that are now known to be in control of their transformations enough so as to not go on murderous rampages. It will be a rather short list, and I still consider it to be a risk to leave these beings unwatched by the Van Helsing estate. But I suppose that composing this list will be a somewhat pleasant reminder that even monstrous transformations and curses can be controlled under the right circumstances. To top the list of beings I noted down was the firstborn daughter of a family that all possess the Lupin's curse. The father of the family had once been a simple thief, a bandit, if you will, who fell in love with a woman who herself had been bitten by a werewolf prior in her life. The bandit was surprisingly accepting of this trait and would help the woman stay bound during the nights of her transformations so as to not harm anyone. They eventually had children, born, as you might expect, with the Lupin's curse themselves, and while the father did his best to restrain them all on the night of their transformations, he could not keep this up indefinitely. On the night of a full moon, his eldest daughter broke free from her bonds and bit her father, cursing him along with the rest of his family. They had but a month to then prepare for all four of them to change. But astoundingly, that was enough time. You see, after all these years, the mother of the family had managed to gain enough control of herself in her altered state to keep herself from harming others. She deemed if she could do this, then her whole family should be able to as well, and she'd have to train them all to do so. Though not without some assistance from a magical artifact she possessed. While she refused to divulge the details of whom she acquired this device from, the mother of the family possessed an enchanted instrument from the East called a xylophone. The common variety is a fairly simple instrument, but hers was able to paralyze any being intended by the player of it, only for them to be unfrozen when the player then strikes another note. This, paired with her own ability to control her altered state, allowed her to keep her family in check as they all transformed together during full-mooned nights. As far as we are aware, nobody in this family has harmed anyone. Outside of their own family, that is. The father has also fully renounced his past criminal life and has turned to the study of ancient curses and beings, such as his family, in the hopes that he can help others with similar problems turn their lives around. Before hunters such as those I am the ward to are forced to take action against them. While I am personally still somewhat skeptical that the children will be able to remain in control of themselves, especially as they reach their more rambunctious teenaged years, I cannot deny that the track record of this family is sound, and that they've managed to remain a loving, connected clan through this trying curse is worthy of respect and praise. Now with this first design, this was genuinely the first drawing I did for this episode. I went with just standard werewolf look. I knew I wanted to try doing some where they were having clothes ripped off, or like D&D inspired kind of outfits for a werewolf or Lycan type creature that's in control of themselves. But with this one I was just like, okay, let's start with just doing a standard looking werewolf, obviously inspired by Bluey's actual look in the show Bluey. But I also knew, like when I did my Tigger drawing in the SCPs episode a couple weeks ago, that I couldn't just have all of the fur be the exact same thickness and texture if I wanted this thing to have enough variety in its look. That much fur rendering would just be a little bit too much. And also I was referencing images of actual blue healers, which is the kind of dog that Bluey is, to get an idea of how to structure the head in a bit less cartoony kind of way. And I also noticed that when I was looking at images of blue healers, that their fur is very flat. Like, it's not this kind of mangy, scruffy fur that I like doing in this new rendering style. And while I could have gone with that more flat kind of look, I decided to just go with that on, like, the face and a little bit on the legs, areas where I didn't want it to be too fluffy and furry looking. And then I had the more furry bits like on the back of the neck and around the waist and shoulders and even near the end of the tail, so that we have that nice little balance of variety of more fluffy looking parts and less fluffy looking parts, with the head still looking a little bit closer to what an actual blue healer's head looks like. I was super happy with how this one turned out, but I knew I wanted to try changing things a little bit around in the next drawings coming up. So let's take a look at how this one turned out. The next werewolf, I suppose, is more accurately a Lycan, as the being can transform at will, though even that term does not fully qualify in this case. He did not acquire his abilities through a bite, but through meddling human incompetence. This young man, one Norville Rogers, is part of a band of traveling supernatural seekers, though while the Van Helsings actively seek out genuine monsters to face, this group more so specializes in debunking mysterious occurrences across various towns and villages that believe themselves to be under some sort of curse. While they have many times faced genuine, lurking, monstrous threats, in most cases they are able to prove that, in truth, often when people believe an entity is ravaging their home, in actuality they are very simply the victim of a ruse. This group was once a band of 5, with the 5th member being a loyal hound, a large English dog that they called Scoobert, who, despite being a rather timid creature, lived through many adventures to the age of 11, then seemed about ready to pass from its old age. Norville, of course, was not willing to see this transpire, however, as he could not let go of whom he considered to be his closest friend. He many times expressed interest in finding a way to extend the life of the hound, and eventually, the highly overconfident leader of the group, Frederick, acquired a spellbook that he believed could help them achieve this. It was written in Latin, a language the man could hardly read, and because of this it is assumed he used a completely incorrect spell, one that he thought would allow him to extend the life of the hound by transferring 5 years off of Norville's life to the creature. This, of course, was not the final result. Instead, he seems to have transferred both the consciousness and elements of the physical form of the hound into Norville's own being. His canine disappeared, but Norville gained the ability to transform at will into a blend of his own human form and that of the hound he once called friend. Norville is unable to remember what transpires when he is in his other form, but he does become stronger and faster as most Lycans do. Though, while he may appear rather intimidating in this form, he still possesses a trait that was shared by himself and his former hound friend: cowardice. Not that I can judge him too harshly for that, I suppose. Anyhow, while he can be a very useful ally to his traveling band, given his enhanced abilities in his Lycan-like state, it often takes much convincing for him to utilize his altered form to aid them in their work, as he is incredibly timid. Thankfully, one consistently useful technique that often convinces Norville to take on his Lycan state and assist them is through his stomach. He has a ravenous appetite in both states of his being, so offering him a well-cooked meal as a reward can often goad him into venturing into a potentially threatening situation. Well, I can't say that I believe this story should ever justify the use of magic by a novice caster. I can't deny that the ultimate results have been positive, both in a way keeping Scoobert alive and well, and also giving this group of mystery solvers a very capable ally, even if he does often need much convincing to be of use. Now, I've been meaning to do a full Scooby-Doo episode for a while now, but my favorite idea for doing one is an idea that's already been done by DC Comics, which is Scooby-Doo in a post-apocalypse setting, which the covers for that series were all done by Jim Lee, one of my favorite comic book artists, and they're super cool. I've never actually read the run, but, I guess me doing it as like a zombie apocalypse story set in the same world as my Five Nights at Freddy's zombie apocalypse episode or something like that, could be different enough to work, but I don't know, I'm still heavily intending to do a full Scooby-Doo episode, but I knew when I was doing Famous Dogs as Werewolves that I had to have Scooby-Doo in here. The idea wasn't originally to have this Scooby-Doo werewolf be Shaggy transforming into essentially a werewolf Scooby-Doo, or I guess a Lycan Scooby-Doo, but I did want to do a werewolf next that had its clothes kind of being torn off as it was transforming or once it had just transformed, and I thought it would be kind of fun to have the clothing on it be Shaggy's classic kind of Scooby-Doo outfit with the green shirt and stuff. And so once I thought of that, I kind of just pieced the story together from there, and I was like, this is kind of a fun, different angle, so this isn't just like a generic fifth member of the group that's a human that can turn into a werewolf. I like this story angle a little bit better. I do think that pose-wise it would have been more interesting for me to have the character actually ripping the clothing off, and if I do another werewolf episode in the near future, I think I'll try something like that, because it could be a cool, similar kind of pose to when I've done Venomized characters trying to rip the Venom symbiote off them. But even with this pose being a little bit on the generic side, I'm still very happy with how this one turned out. The final being I noted down on my first day of compiling this list was another that is technically more Lycan than werewolf, but this one's form is even stranger than the prior case. This Lycan is a member of a group of 6 other such beings, all granted the Lycan's curse by their adoptive father, Ryder Pawson III. This man, well, hardly in his 30s himself, adopted a group of 6 orphans in his home city, lining the Bay of Adventius. This region was constantly under threat of vampire attack, since the vicious vampire lord, Trishore Humdinger, had his castle not far from their borders. Ryder's own parents had been killed by minions of the vampire, and as such he felt it his duty to use his family's vast fortune to take in any children who too had lost their homes to this monster. Though he certainly took things too far with what he attempted to do to his adopted kin. You see, he sought out a Lycan and paid the creature off to bite all of his children once they reached their teenage years, to grant them the ability to transform into Lycans themselves. While by all accounts this should have gone very, very wrong, he was surprisingly able to teach them to utilize these abilities to help the people of their home city and to fend off the forces of the vampire lord. Each of them has their own unique set of strengths, but the member of the family that intrigued me most, personally, was the girl called Skye. For some unknown reason, her Lycan form comes with a set of bat-like wings, giving her the ability to fly, an unusual but quite helpful advantage in facing off against vampires. They have not yet managed to slay Humdinger, and I fear this may have simply goaded the monster into concocting new, more dangerous threats to scourge the town, such as creating his own clan of Aelerthropes, or more commonly called Werecats. When this group took siege of the town, the results were catastrophic to say the least. Though I must admit that the tales of how the Lycan family eventually fought them off was quite thrilling to hear. They continue to patrol the city, and while the Van Helsings have given a stern warning to Ryder to never delve into curses such as that of the Lycan again, it is difficult to deny that the results have been largely positive. If the family does not manage to defeat the vampire lord in the next short while, we shall likely be forced to return to the city and assist them in finishing the job. But for the time being, the Van Helsings have elected to trust this troop in protecting the people of their home. Now, I knew I was going to use a Paw Patrol character, partially because the request for this episode spawned from Wahid Abdullah asking for a Paw Patrol-focused episode for his little cousin. Hello to your cousin, by the way. And one of the suggestions was to turn Paw Patrol characters into werewolves, and I loved that idea. And the reason that I ended up going with Skye for this episode is just that I wanted some shape variety, and the idea of a flying werewolf just seemed like a really cool concept, and I also leaned into a more dynamic pose for this one because the character could fly, and have her kind of like reaching out and flying towards us. I also again referenced images of the actual kind of dog that she's supposed to be, and technically she's supposed to be a cockapoo, but in looking at reference images of cockapoos, I didn't think she actually looked that much like them, other than her ears being a little bit on the fluffier side, so I tried to do a blend of referencing cockapoo images, but also trying to keep her head shape a little bit more similar to how she looks in the show. Also, full disclosure, there was going to be 4 drawings for this episode of either Courage the Cowardly Werewolf or Clifford the Big Red Werewolf, but I have been overworking myself the last 3 weeks or so, and my body sent me a very clear signal this week that if I didn't take it a little bit easier this week, that I was going to end up getting sick. So I was like, all right, 3 drawings, that's fine. And I'm not really disappointed about that because I really like how all 3 drawings in this episode turned out. Though I am still very interested in doing those other 2 werewolf drawings, so maybe this will have to get a sequel. Anyway, I hope you all like the Skye werewolf. Let's take a look.
If you enjoyed this, I highly recommend checking out my famous Kids TV characters as SCPs episode, or maybe my Monster Hunter Folklore episode, set in this same universe. And I'd love more suggestions of other pop culture dogs you'd like me to turn into werewolves if this gets around too. Plus, if you want the high resolution art and the inks from this episode, you can get those over on the PopCross Studios Patreon, along with the fact that I'm currently doing weekly podcasts on there. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And today's quote is from a man named Xavier Dogba, who says that being real will bring you your soul tribe. Your people can't find you if you don't disclose yourself. Now, that's not to say you should plaster everything about yourself across the internet for other people to find you, but if you find that you're frequently repressing your true self, not openly speaking your beliefs out of fear of judgment, it's good to remember that being open with who you are, while it might initially repel some people, will eventually make it more likely that the people that actually resonate with you that you want to spend your time with will find you. I hope that's inspiring, I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday. Goodbye.